Hello everyone. This is lesson 13. If you recall in lesson 11, the person obtained free choice. In lesson 12, the person used free choice to put on fig leaves, which are false selves. Now we're going to learn what happens when each of us puts on a false self. I'm going to quote from Genesis. Being God said, "Behold, the person has become one of us, because he knows good and bad." Let's take that slowly. The person has put on fig leaves, but they've also obtained free choice. Because the person has free choice, they are rewarded, Eve points out, by being fully divine, fully one with God, with the Spirit. So being God says, "Behold, the person has become one of us." That's the second time in the Garden of Eden story that Eve has declared that when she used her third eye to look at a baby, she saw divine life and nothing, and no differentiation between human life and divine life. So being God says, "Behold, the person has become one of us because he knows good and bad." That implied in that is because he knows the consequences of knowing good and bad. He can make choices now to live in the garden or live outside the garden. As soon as he puts on a false self, the person puts on a false self. The first time each one of us puts on a false self, we no longer experience oneness with ourselves, oneness with others. We are no longer in the peak experience, in the I-thou experience, in nirvana, in the kingdom. Those are all terms for the soul experience or for the garden experience. Then Genesis goes on to say, "And now, lest the person put forth his hand to take of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Being God's sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the earth from which he was taken." Let's take that slowly. "And now, lest the person put forth his hand and take of the tree of life." Within us is the principle that as soon as we become false, we cannot eat of the tree of life. That when we eat of the tree of life, we experience the soul experience. So that's automatic. "And now lest the person put forth his hand and take of the tree of life and eat and live forever." By living forever, Eve means when you're in the soul experience, you feel timeless. You feel like you've lived forever and that you will live forever. So it's an experience of eternal life that one has when one is in the garden, when one is in the kingdom, when one is in nirvana. So being God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the earth. Automatically, when we put on a false self, we're put outside the garden. To till the earth means to do the work to remove that false self to get back into the garden. Earth is our receptive, unreflective consciousness. So we use spirit inspiration to identify our false self and to learn the steps of getting back into the garden. All right, now we want to, Buddha comments on the process of tilling the earth. Buddha said, "The fool sleeps as one dead, but the master is awake and he lives eternally. So wake up, reflect, notice, and work earnestly and carefully. Live on the way of the soul, and the light will increase in you. Let's take that slowly. The fool sleeps as one dead. A fool is a person who is not aware that he or she is false. The fool is not aware of how to till the earth and remove false selves. A fool is one who is comfortable with being false and spends his or her life promoting and reflecting a false self. But the master is awake and he lives eternally. The master is one who is constantly tilling his earth and constantly removing any falseness. That's the primary thing that the person is doing. Through all the activities during the day, the person is being conscious of himself or herself, recognizing when he or she is anxious, worried, and those are the signs that one is defending and promoting a false self. For example, I'm making these videos. Sometimes I'm me, and sometimes I'm identifying with the success of these videos. Sometimes then when I'm identified with the success of the videos, I'm worried about the camera, about the people shooting, about the microphone. I'm worried about me. I'm outside of the Garden of Eden. When I choose to make these videos secondary to being me, all of a sudden I'm back in oneness with myself, with the people shooting, and I have a sense of living eternally. I'm aware that of the timelessness of being in this soul experience. Then he says, so wake up, reflect, notice, and work earnestly and carefully to remove those false selves. Live on the way of the soul. The rest of these videos will be showing how to live on the way of the soul. And the light will increase in you. When you look at the image here in the center, you see a person full of false selves. As the person removes those false selves, they live more and more at the top of the pyramid. There will be times when you leap to the very top, and those are the times when you've done the work to become real and become naked. And all of a sudden, you will experience, wow, this is a wonderful way to live. Then you drop down to the level of living not in oneness with yourself, but in oneness with falseness. Then you do the work again, and then you move up. As you keep doing that over and over again, you become more and more real and more and more a Joan of Arc. Now we're going to read from Genesis again. So being God drove out the person to Nod, and placed at the east of the Garden of Eden a cherubim and a flaming sword, which turned around to guard the way to the tree of life. And being God's placed at the east of the Garden of Eden a cherubim and a flaming sword. The east of the Garden of Eden is the place where the sun rises. The sun is the life and inspiration of spirit. When we enter the garden again, we do with that inspiration. So we enter the garden from the east. A cherubim and a flaming sword are two faculties within us. A cherubim is an angel. It's the ability, it's our intuition, our ability to listen to spirit and to follow and to discern whether to follow the inspiration. The flaming sword is our conscious, our sense of right and wrong, our sense of being ourselves or not being ourselves. So when we within us, we know when we're real and when we're not. And that's the flaming sword makes sure that we do not get into the garden unless we're real. And a flaming sword was turned around to guard the way to the tree of life. Our conscience turns around and makes sure that we are not going to live full of life and light unless we become real. That's what this passage is saying. Now let's look at what Jesus says about a flaming sword. Jesus said, perhaps they are thinking, namely man, that I have come to throw peace upon the world, and they know not that I have come to throw divisions upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. Very powerful poem. Jesus said, perhaps they are thinking, namely men. When Jesus uses the word men, he means people on the way of the mind, people who are unconscious, people who are indoctrinated in various organizations, religions, political parties, their social group, who are not reflective upon themselves and who do not do the work to become more real. Perhaps they are thinking, namely men, that I have come to throw peace upon the world. So, for example, Christians on Sunday go to church and they probably think that they're going to encounter a Jesus who intends to bring them peace. But then he says, and they know not that I have come to throw divisions upon the earth. In other words, Jesus would have no part of an organization that brainwashes people with dogma and does not empower them to discover themselves on their own. So they're blindly going to an organization that is trying to control how they think and act. Jesus would have nothing to do with that. He says, I have come to throw divisions upon the earth. I have come to upset people. I have come to make them reflect upon themselves and see how to become more real. I have come to upset everyone. I have come to distinguish between indoctrinating organizations and people and organizations that empower people to discover their own answers. And they know not that I have come to throw divisions upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. Fire is confrontive words. Jesus intends to confront us. Sword, words that divide those that are real from those that are false. He wants to make it very clear that those people who have become babes, who have become Joan of Arcs, stand out. Those are the ones that he wants as his followers. He comes upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. He intends to bring war between those on the way of the mind and those on the way of the soul. He wants to heal the world, so his goal is not to bring peace to this world, but to bring division. That's the force of this poem. It's a Jesus that many people do not know. Let's look at an image that summarizes what Jesus is saying. You see on the left a person full of false selves. When a person is not full of false selves and living at the top, on the right it says, these people bring the sword and war to the mind-way world. So these are Joan of Arcs who challenge the world. The people living, when we live down full of false selves, these people bring compromise, conformity, accommodation, tolerance, and false peace to the mind-way world. It's very common right now for people to try to resolve religious conflict by asking everyone to be tolerant of other people's beliefs. Jesus is not tolerant. Jesus points out that identifying with any dogma is darkness. To conform to dogma is not to exercise free choice. It's not to listen to Spirit and make decisions for yourself. So he is not a conformist. He is not endorsing accommodation. He is not endorsing tolerance of religious differences. He is saying get rid of religion, get rid of indoctrinating organizations, and then everyone will be free to be themselves. And when they're free to be themselves, they will be automatically one with each other and will solve the world's problems. Now I'd like you to read a passage from Mark, which I find very powerfully expresses how another way that Jesus saw himself as the flaming sword. In Mark, he talks about a situation that Jesus was in with his disciples and with his family. It starts off like this. And his mother and his brothers came, and they stood outside, and they sent into him, calling him. And a crowd was sitting about him, and they chattered, "Behold, your mother and your brothers outside, and they are seeking you." And Jesus answered them by saying, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And having looked around on the ones about him sitting in a circle, he said, "Behold my mother and my brothers. The one having done the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." This means a lot to me, so I'm going to go through it slowly and give you an opportunity to see if it is important to you. And his mother and his brothers came. Now, his mother and his brothers are Torah Jews. They've identified with being a Jew, with being the traditions of Judaism, the traditions of being a Jew. They've identified with the Torah law. They're full of false selves. They're full of identifying with this dogma and that dogma and that dogma. So they are stood outside. The phrase "stood outside" means they were not part of Jesus. They are not part of those people who strive to leave dogma and become one with themselves. And they sent into him, calling him. So they wanted him to come and join them and their religion and all of their traditional beliefs about what it means to be a Jew, when in fact he was teaching people to be individuals. You can be a Jew secondarily, but primarily one needs to be himself. You can go to synagogue, fine, but don't identify with what goes on there. Always maintain your individuality and your independence. And a crowd was sitting about him, and they chattered, "Behold, your mother and your brothers outside, and they are seeking you." That's humor. They are really not seeking Jesus. They're seeking Jesus to conform to their way of living. And Jesus answered them by saying, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" That's the flaming sword. He's challenging, he is delivering fire, which is confrontive words, when he says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Behold my mother and my brothers. The one having done the will of God is my brother and sister and mother. The one listening to Spirit in the moment and choosing to be continually himself and not false, that person knows the will of God through the inspiration that is being given to him or her every second. So to do the will of God, one becomes one with spirit inspiration. And if you recall the lesson in which people were learning to do that, you watched a video of people learning to do that. It is a skill that we can all participate in. It is a skill that we can all learn. So this passage from Mark, I think, summarizes the message, the mission, not only of Jesus, but also of Buddha, Abraham, and Eve. And that is to divide those who are listening to Spirit in the moment from those who are conforming to society. So that's the end of the lesson. If you liked it, would you click on like below? You can put your comments and questions below and I will answer them. If you want to read portions of the books, go to the website www.7771.org. On that website you can read the overview, you can take the self-examination, and you can sign up for additional materials. I enjoyed being with you, and I look forward to being with you in the next lesson. Have a good day.